I'd like to hear from John Crossman team.
Because we want to give you a challenge that stretches you in your skills of building a team and accomplishing an objective and using the leadership framework. Don't forget that. That is huge. How you use the leadership framework is a big deal. You know how you grow as a leader? You lead. Yes, sir.
It's actually really funny is I put the wrong video in. It's supposed to be a picture of us at the end.
Good afternoon. We didn't know that Barry was rapping. Just kidding. You rap. You're pretty talented. Well, I'm Renee Begay, and where are we starting? Oh, this is Bruce McClanahan and Mark Hinkle. I'm nervous. So Joe Liller and Nick Bear. So we interviewed John Crossman with a real estate business. And since we were talking about grace and truth, I kind of have to start off with a little bit of truth. When we got put together for the 24-hour team, I had to practice my assertiveness and let my team know that I was having a hard time adjusting to the beginning of the SLI, because I know this wasn't, and deep apologies to Mark Rudder, but he had talked about how for the next 2 years you're going to get to know each other. So, you'll bump elbows with each other and you'll get to know each other. But within the Native American culture that I was brought up in, introduction is very important. And so it took me a while to adjust. And so when I got up to the room, I had to let my team know, I'm having a hard time adjust to this. And so my team was really gracious, and these men were very sensitive to my needs, and they said, okay, well, let's, introduce each other the way you see in your culture. And so they really honored me in doing that, and so they did a really good job. And so so how we organized our team, or how we started off right away, was introducing ourselves and our families and how what ministries we're a part of, but then just even sharing a little bit of our stories with each other. And so that's kind of how we started off. Then we also led off with prayer, kind of giving our time and our work to the Lord. And we also shared ideas about how we wanted to have the meeting go conceptually with Mr. Crossman. And we also brainstormed some questions from the leadership framework. And so we were kind of having a hard time trying to figure out some of the questions to ask. So we just ended up just writing all the questions that we had in our heads down. And so once we wrote it down, we cut them up, and we put them into piles of which one goes into this quadrant. And so we piled them up, and then we saw what kind of questions that we went with, and each of us took responsibility for each one, and then we're able to formulate questions based on that to ask in the meeting, in our interview. And so once we finalized the questions for our interview with John, we were able to go through with that. And
yeah, as Renee said, my name is Joe Liller, by the way. As Renee said, we had done a lot of brainstorming with the questions, and as other groups had mentioned, we had done a lot of wheel spinning before that, and just trying to get organized a little bit. So that was really key to getting organized and having a better idea of how this was all going to go down. So after we had brainstormed, we gathered the questions together and organized them by the different responsibilities and roles, and we each took one of those responsibilities and roles and keyed in on a couple key questions to bring into the meeting with John, and listen to him, listen to his story, have those questions ready, but then also here for ways he's answering those questions or answering those different areas of leadership. So we're going to go through some of those right now.
So we wanted to have the opportunity to introduce you to John Crossman before we actually talked about his leadership. And so we have a short video that just gives you some idea of the man himself and the kind of person that we encountered.
Since his graduation from Florida State University's College of Business in 1993, John Crossman has personally been involved in more than $1 billion in transactions.
That is one of the most famous Publixes ever, because that just an architectural feature there.
If you've been in a Publix grocery store, chances are it was Crossman and Company who helped make your shopping a pleasure.
But the reason why it was important is because it's a Publix center we renovated and redeveloped in Lakeland. So a lot of Publix executives probably shop there and things like that.
Together, John and his brother have built one of the largest retail leasing, management, development, and marketing firms in the Southeast. And it just so happens the foundation for their success also started in the family.
You talk about Dad being a pastor. Your dad was about community and community connection. When you start talking about shopping centers, that's our business, shopping centers are about community.
John grew up the son of a preacher, famed civil rights leader.
When my dad passed away, the Clintons were kind enough to send a letter to my mom, each of them.
And his father taught him important lessons in faith, education, relationships, and helping those in need, lessons he would later adapt to his career.
Whenever then you go in the working world and you work hard, get a good education, and you're able to make a good living, then you're able to give back and do a lot of important things. Well, my brother bought this painting, and really was just symbolic of what we're all about. And the symbolism is that we're the waiter, and that what we do is we serve and we take care of people.
From the community to the classroom, John has taken that servant leader mentality to heart.
So we thought we'd take some time just to talk to you about some of the things we learned. We'll have the framework up, but you'll just hear us talk about some of those different parts. I'm going to start with Renee again, just talking about the heart.
So I asked questions kind of about the heart of his leadership, and the one thing, or the very first thing that he pointed out with the heart of his leadership was just relationships. It kind of came out through everything that he was talking about, the importance of relationships and the practice of servant leadership. There's 4 core values in his company, and 2 of those that struck us was, the second one was servant leadership, and then the third one was to practice humility, openness, and what was the third one? Kindness. And so that was just at the heart of what he practiced in his leadership. And it was really challenging because he first opened with a question of, do we really do that? And he even kind of put us on the spot of whether we do that in crew or not, that we say that we're servant leaders, but do we actually do it? And the thing that he kept emphasizing was that in leadership, it's kind of like a yin and yang, that you have to have a healthy giving and receiving relationship with people that you work with, versus a charity relationship where someone comes to you and says, I need this, and once they get it, they don't have anything else to do with him or us with them. And so that struck me personally because I was able to kind of see that in my ministry, how after 500 years of evangelism to Native Americans, only 3% claim that they follow Jesus. And so a lot of the methods and ways in which we've been reaching out to Native American communities is through charity. And we've realized that charity doesn't give dignity to people. And so what we want to do is have that healthy relationship with the Native American community where we learn from them, we learn from their culture, but then we're also able to give to them too, but that it's like a healthy relationship. And so that's kind of the things that I learned from him with just asking those two questions.
We're going to now split up the roles and the responsibilities a little bit, and I'm going to talk for a little bit about spokesperson and vision caster. One of the things that really struck me is usually when I've thought about a spokesperson in the past, it's always been verbal, how they communicate their vision. But John was really strong in communicating that it's just as much about how you share your life, how you live your life. And he gave an example of his father, who stood up against the Klan in the Stone Mountain, Georgia area, and how that spoke volumes to him and his brother as they were growing up. And it wasn't just, this is what he said, how to fight against racism, but watching his father's life. That was such an example to him. I think also, he said it's about paying attention to the people that you're trying to reach, the clients, and then connecting your passion with where they're at. And that really was encouraging to me in that area. And then finally, I think casting vision. He has a big vision to reach college students and share his skills and his visions with them. And so he goes around to colleges all over the U.S. And speaks on various topics regarding real estate. And one of the cool things that I really liked about him is how he weaves scripture into all of his presentations. He goes into all these college campuses, and instead of saying, this is what the Bible says, he says, and a wise person also said, and then he would quote a scripture verse. And people would come up to him afterwards really drawn to his presentation, really drawn to how he communicated, and really captured what he was speaking about. And I think a lot of it was how he lived his life and his passion, and how he just wants to connect with people. That really spoke loudly.
I get to tell you a little bit about what I learned from John in terms of direction setting. And what was interesting for me in trying to talk to him about direction setting was I couldn't get him to quite answer my direct questions. So some of this was more me just trying to put together what I was hearing from him. And one of the things that he said that I think probably would give some idea of his philosophy of setting direction was he said this. He said, leaders lead through the process of influence. In other words, it's not so much through the authority or position, but by the influence that they can have to create change. And I saw him over and over again talk about how he's seeking to influence different parts of the industry as well as different parts of our society. He really wove his faith closely together with his job. And sometimes it was difficult to tell which one he was talking about. In the end, I realized he didn't dichotomize. It was whole for him. In terms of direction setting, I think you could look at the 4 core values of the company itself. He would started by saying, hey, we want to maintain enthusiastically satisfied clients. And he said, so it's not enough just to get new clients, but it's also about maintaining. And so direction isn't just going out and getting new, but direction includes keeping those people involved and maintaining those relationships. Then you've already heard from Renee as she spoke about those inner 2 pieces. The humility, openness, kindness, also developing servant leadership. But a second part also had to do with developing new talent. And I saw that in terms of direction setting, it was interesting to hear him talk about the fact that when he was asked, is your company, is it a leader in the industry? His first response was going to be no. But then he looked at it from the idea of influence, and he said, no, if we think about influence, yes, we are leaders in the industry. He went on to say his goal would be that in the years to come, that every student in every university throughout the U.S. who graduates in retail real estate would have his thumbprint or the thumbprint of Crossman on their forehead. And that to me said something of, this is the direction I'm headed. This is the influence that we want to have. And so that was really exciting for me.
So talking about change agent and alignment, you know, I was personally very interested in hearing him talk about change in his company, change in employees, and also the issues of alignment, because frankly, that's a lot of what we're going through, I think, both as crew, as we've gone through some major branding changes and the like over the last couple of years, but particularly in our division, crew military, we are just in a massive season of change. And so one of the things you pick up about John is he's a very passionate person, and he really likes getting things done. And so he said sometimes, you know, when change is needed, we tend to move very fast, but he's had to learn that not everyone goes at the pace of fast. And so he's had to learn how to slow down in order to align and bring everyone along. And he talked about the need for good communication in the midst of that, and how important it is for the leader to listen. He shared a story about how there needed to be a change in employment, where there was an individual who was coming every Monday morning hungover to his company, and how other employees were trying to communicate this to him over time, and he just wasn't listening. And so there needed to be a change, but he wasn't listening as leader. And so when this issue rose to the point where they had to actually deal with it, as a leader, he circled back around to a particular individual who was trying to communicate this to him, and he said, you know what, I am so sorry. A change had to happen. You were trying to communicate it to me. I wasn't listening. Will you please tell me all over again? Which I personally thought was very interesting, because the guy was already gone, who was the issue. And yet he was circling back around and hearing the person out. So those two issues of in the midst of change, slowing down to the needed pace in order to make sure everyone is aligned with it, and then also being able to provide an atmosphere and a culture where good communication happens and where leadership listens is very important.
As we approach John in the coaching segment of the leadership role, he was really challenged to answer the question how they develop their staff. He said, as a company, they do a great job at identifying new talent. And they've obviously been successful as a company, and they're well regarded in the industry. And so they've had a lot of staff leave, poached from other companies. So it's been a big challenge for him, and he said it's an area they need to improve on. But I go back to what some others said about him having an influence not only in his company, but having an influence within the industry and around the country. And he's really developing and coaching a lot of these college students. He said in Florida he's currently at every single university that has a real estate department, and he has that goal of reaching the entire nation. So, and I was also looking at the motivation, responsibility, and I think it goes back to his idea of relationships being a key part of his work environment, his office. And it's getting to know his staff, getting to know them personally, taking time to know their family, and get on that level of having an open and transparent environment, and having that as a motivation to bring out the best in people and have a great working environment.
Okay, so before we go into what we have personally gleaned from John, we want to spend a little bit of time in saying, what can crew learn from John Crossman? And I want to do something a little bit different. I just want to throw that out to you guys. From what you've heard so far, as we've worked through the framework and just some of the brief principles, we were only trying to grab little nuggets from John. We can't share everything. What are some of the things that you guys have heard that you could immediately apply as crew from some of the lessons from John Crossman? Dreaming big. Dreaming big? Well, why do you say that? Isn't it amazing? Yeah, movements everywhere. It's great. In fact, that's actually why our team chose to put the heart up there, our thumbprints. And there's two, because as Joe was saying, John was clearly communicating over and over again, not only his agencies or his businesses' core values, but his personal walk with Jesus Christ. And I think, Bruce, you were the one that said that it was evident to us walking away that there wasn't just one fingerprint going on each one of those students. It was really two. It was John Crossman and Jesus Christ, and how exciting that was. What other leadership? Yeah.
Well, I mean, if the vision is impacting an industry with a kingdom way, and having a vision for that, and it'll probably result in evangelism, but that's part of his stewardship, and he's taking that very seriously. That he's trying to bring kingdom ways into a whole industry of how people do the next generation of people, how they do business, in real estate.
Real estate investments. Yeah. REIT. What else? Yeah, sister. Yeah, right on. That's great. In fact, he tells a story about how going out, he was at a meeting in D.C., and so he went on a run, and he's just running by all these monuments, and he's by Lincoln's monument and Dr. King's monument, and he starts to reflect, and he starts to realize the sacrifice that these individuals made and the sacrifice that he has to make as a follower of Christ, even in the business realm. And one of the things that he spoke to us is the pain that he's experienced as a leader as a result of sacrifices that he's made in order to relate to the people in his office, relate to the different investors, and because it was so relationally intense, and in terms of taking care of himself, he had to get to a point where he had to learn how to take the time to reflect. And so he actually started running again, which is something he did in college, and would take those times to reflect. And very powerful stories that he shared with us along those lines, and some of the things that he gleaned in the midst of those reflections.
Yeah, I think this may not be directly what he meant to say, but there's something I extrapolated. When he was talking about his dad being a pastor, and it's all about community, and then seeing grocery stores, it's all about community, developing community. I kept thinking about how Crew thinks of community. We use that word very, it's our buzzword, right? We're all about, we want to foster community, that's just what we say, but I think, as I think about it contextually across different people groups, I was studying perspectives, and we were talking about you can't reach individuals with the gospel anymore when you go overseas. You have to reach families, because that's how you effectively church plant, is actually through community church planting. And so I find that sometimes maybe our tactics can be very individualistic in how we reach individuals. But you can't church plant when you go overseas, like got one person from this corridor, this person from that side, this person from this side, and you try to bring them together, and it doesn't work. You have to reach like communities all at once in a corporate sense. And I'm wondering if, like, as we think about sharing the gospel, like when he talks about community, it's like I want to build community development plans for a whole neighborhood, for a whole nation, for a whole area, instead of just let's just do 4 laws for this one guy, and then just see where that goes from there.
Isn't it amazing that just in a very brief presentation, how much we as Crew can begin to benefit from leadership principles? We're going to go into a time now where we're just going to pass the mic and just briefly share some of the things that we personally gained from this experience.
I know that one of the things that I'm still reflecting on was that John said, good leaders suffer. And really, I understood him to mean that when you lead from the heart and you empathize with those that you're leading, you actually feel their pain as you lead. And I even wondered about his capacity to continue feeling that. He even said, sometimes I've considered praying for a hard heart so that I would stop hurting. So there's something about, though, that pain, I think, makes him a better leader. The only other thing I wanted to bring up for me that I thought was really great was when he was talking about success. He says one of the keys to success is showing up, just showing up. And as he was tracing his history of how he got to where he is, he said, in a lot of cases, it was just because I showed up and nobody else did. And so a great key to success is showing up. Last one is he expressed the urgency of his actual retail business. He said, every day that I don't get a client for a retail shop, money, I'll never see that money. That money's gone. It's finished. And I took that and I thought about, okay, what if we view the gospel that way and our work that way? The urgency of every day that we don't give the seriousness of the treasure that we hold as stewards. Every day that we don't give it that seriousness, what have we lost and what have others lost? And it's not meant to be a guilt trip, but more just the amazing treasure we hold and the value that it is.
As a person who is typically more focused on projects, I was really struck by his really passion to connect with individuals, and specifically about the servant leadership. The story that he told that really impacted me, we've all heard the Good Samaritan, and he kind of shared about how the Good Samaritan is on the side of the road, which is a ditch, which back then was basically a sewer. So he was, jumping into the sewer to help the people. And I was thinking, what does it look like for me to jump into the sewer in my neighborhood in the inner city of Chicago and help hurting pastors or hurting staff members or hurting broken homeless people in Chicago? What does it look like to jump in the sewer and journey with them in their pain? So that really impacted me. And the other thing that he shared that really challenged me was he talked about even relationships are two-way, even with donors, even with our supporters, that do we go and we send our prayer letters to them, but do we ever go and learn about them? And he really challenged us to get on Facebook and really connect with all of our donors and learn about what they're into and send them notes and encourage them and make it even a two-way relationship with our donors. And that really impacted me.
One thing I learned about him that I really admired was how he set his boundaries in his life, because I was just kind of wondering, how does someone so busy and successful like this keep going? And so we asked him how he takes care of himself, and one of the things that he mentioned was how setting boundaries was a really good thing for him, that every Friday mornings is his Bible study, and even if people try to call him or a client calls him and asks him to do something, he lets them know that he's not available during that time, even though there's money involved or whatever, that he'll let them know, this is my time to have a Bible study and I'm not available. And how he gives his family the weekend. He doesn't do work during the weekend. He even said that he runs before his kids get up or his family gets up, so that he's available to them. And so I really admired the way he sets his boundaries in his life, even though it's really busy. And I know that all of us can just overwork ourselves, because that's what we naturally do. But just figuring out times to take rest and set really good boundaries and, stand up for yourself in that. And I'm trying to learn how to do that. So that's what I really liked.
I really took away his emphasis on relationships within the staff, and how getting to know one another, and the importance of being kind and gentle. Kindness was a key thing that he kept talking about, and how people are fragile. And I can tend to be stern at times or something, with my own kids and stuff like that. But that people have gentle or fragile hearts, and he even has a fragile heart. And so just speaking kindness into situations, and getting down into the mess of relationships. Relationships are messy, but we're supposed to be dirty. And also one last thing I'll say is, in relationships, at times of crisis, if we know people's stories and we are open with them and they're open with us, and if there's a time of crisis, then that's really our time to shine. We can't let the busyness of our job allow us to neglect speaking into people's lives at times of crisis. So I really, I'm going to take that back to where I work.
I think for me, Bruce, I believe already mentioned this a little bit, but he really challenged us in regards to how we view donors. In fact, he was very direct and even a little rebuking to crew, staff members who he's known, and how often there's not a relationship with donors. We talk about donor partners, but how oftentimes it's really, you know, hey, you send me your money and I'll send you a newsletter and I don't really need to hear from you ever again. And how wounded he's been in the past, and how he's even stopped supporting some crew staff because of he's gone to them and asked them for things, simple things, and they weren't able to come and help. So hearing that, it brought conviction into my life. I'm reading a book right now called Donors Are People Too, and just realizing, you know, I've always had the perspective that my donors, I would think that they would want me to be busy doing ministry, not taking a lot of time trying to connect with them on Facebook. But I was challenged by what he said. And I look forward to trying to set up boundaries and time scheduling better in order to engage those people and really actually form more of a relational partnership than what has existed over these years. So with that, we'd like to go into a time of Q&A. Do you have any questions? Jenny.
Yeah. Okay. Jenny asked about like why it was so difficult for me. Okay, the only way I can explain it is like, you know, telling you a story. I've been to retreats or places where it's predominantly Native American pastors and leaders, and the first thing we do is come into the room and we arrange the chairs in a circle so that we can all see each other. And the first day was committed to intro. So 2 to 3 hours was like going from person to person and listening to their story and how they came to know the Lord, who their family members are. You know, this is so-and-so, these are my kids, this is my grandparents, I come from this family, describing their family, really getting to know them. And then, you know, go to sleep, wake up the next morning, eat together, and then we started the content. Being, you know, nominated to be in this leadership, like, I was very scared coming in because I knew that I offer such a different perspective. But I know that the Lord wants me to let you guys know, you know, this different perspective and put it on the table so that you guys may know too and be aware of it. So that's why it was so hard, because I want to get to know you guys, and I will eventually, but it was hard, like, you know, trying to look around and see who's all involved, and I didn't know you guys yet. And, you know, that's why I was like trying to look through the directory real quick to look at your families, and seeing pictures of your families was really helpful, you know, like in what context you're in, I guess, as far as family. So I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah.
I was struck by the number of times you guys mentioned in your presentation the impact that a story
So John is a very passionate, direct speaker, and he does not hold much back at all when he communicates, and he communicates quickly. And it was honestly challenging, like Barry said earlier, to know when he was talking about leadership, when he was talking about his personal life, when he was talking about his business. And yet, through all of these stories, anecdotes, and lessons that he fired off, there was themes that we were able to pull out of them. And so I think that as a team, one of the challenges we had when we came back today was to try to identify the grid of the framework here within those themes to draw out many of the principles. So he is a very clear communicator, but he does communicate in bulk through personal experience. And so less anecdotal stories, but far more personal experience stories. I felt like I got to see the guy's heart, his wounds, his history pretty quickly. Anybody else? Yeah, very transparent. And that was actually one of the key leadership principles that he had also communicated to us that was vital to his organization, was transparency. If you looked at the directory, you'll see my leadership quote is "give them the bayonet." The reason why that I put that is because I was literally traveling from Wisconsin to Virginia, moving my family, and we're in a resort, and there was a picture of Stonewall Jackson, and I was like, I have to get this done, give them the bayonet. But the actual quote that I should have put that has been very near to dear to me is "leadership is influence," which is something that Jay Lorenzen, if you know him, on staff with Crew, taught me at Gettysburg. And I personally have experienced that over and over again, being 10 years at Naval Station Great Lakes. I was a nobody. I'm a civilian. I'm on a military installation. I have no rank. I wasn't a director, and yet I was trying to launch a local movement. And so leadership is influence to me because you can lead up, down, left, right, any direction. And so at the same day that I'm trying to influence junior enlisted guys to invite guys to an outreach from their barracks is the same day that I'm going to the CEO's office as a civilian trying to get a family life thing started in base housing because I need his permission to do that. And so influence is very important there when position was non-existent.
I don't know if this will answer your question, but I work with Global Aid Network, and as a ministry, we're fairly small, and we have to work with churches, or else we don't really exist. And so a lot of times we have to come alongside churches, and usually it's a church leadership that's already has a like mindset of serving the world through humanitarian aid and seeing the gospel spread. But us being there in partnership with them, we have to help to influence their congregation to come alongside them and come alongside us to serve and to pack up the aid that we need that needs to go out.
I was actually the one who quoted him, and I think I did that for a couple of reasons. One is I work with the Jesus Film. I'm in a position where I'm not in the executive leadership team, and yet I'm developing a system of management for our projects that involves everyone in the Jesus Film. It involves culture change in the way we do things, and there's resistance to that. And so I can't, if I just mandate it, which I can't do anyway, but if I just mandated it, that would actually solidify the resistance. Rather, if I can actually show why it's valuable, if I can show that I'm convinced this is the way we should go, that influence actually softens resistance versus sometimes mandates clarify and harden resistance. I also am in a position where sometimes I have to try to lead up. And that I don't think I can do it in any other way other than through trying to influence. And it's influence with information, it's influence with fact, but it's also influence with heart, conviction. And so that's one of the reasons why when he said it, it just felt good. It felt like, yeah, that makes sense to me. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, that was a little sticky at times, but I think it was really good to get to know one another. We did start off the time a little bit, kind of sharing out some of our strengths, like some of the other teams mentioned. And I think, we all kind of just chipped in where need be. There was times when there was a lull, we would kind of share, or there were some times when we say, well, you've been a little quiet, why don't you share a little bit? So we're not all, like on our team, we're not all outspoken leaders on our team, and so we had to find ways to include all the various types and different gifts, like even adding videos in. Some of us are more linear, structural, some of us are more free-flowing, so we tried to incorporate a little bit of all those things into our presentation, into our planning. I don't know if there's anyone else wants to comment on it?
It was really messy. I think I was surprised at how messy it was, and it's so nice to have finished. But yeah, you bet. A little bit of open honesty there. But it was really fun to work together. And the one thing I would say is I feel really close to these guys, as close as I can with the little that we know each other. Because if there was anything, is nobody, even though there's people here who could have, nobody overwhelmed the rest. So there was a commitment on everyone's part to not take over. So it made part of the mess, but it was also part of what made us relate well together.
Love that honesty. You gotta love it. Just need you to stand with me just a couple, hang in there just for a